Greetings, everyone, and welcome to Interfaith Paths to Peace. This is our Thursday afternoon LouLab, and we have a special treat today. We are having an exciting conversation about conversations. The topic is how do we create dynamic we space? And we have an incredible panel of some of the most wise and talented people that I know. So you're really going to enjoy the conversation today. It will be a panel conversation, and yet we're going to try to model what we're talking about in order to help us understand how do we create a really dynamic space between each other. And we're all having to try to model that now online. And so we're going to try to model having dynamic we space while talking about dynamic we space. If you're joining us on Facebook Live, I want to welcome you. This will be a great chance for you to ask questions if you have them, and so you can put them in the chat box, and we'll be sure to bring them into the conversation as we go. And if you're joining us on Zoom, I also want to welcome you. There'll be opportunities for you to jump in as well and ask questions. You can put those in the Zoom, or you can put those in the comment box, or you're also welcome to just unmute yourself and bring yourself into the conversation with questions at the appropriate time. So I want to start as we begin, just to take a moment to kind of drop into being present, just to be here now. I imagine those of you that are on Facebook may be at work or in your car or wherever you find yourself at the moment. One of the things we know about creating dynamic space for conversation and connection is to become present to ourselves, because the body and the mind and the heart become the vehicle for which we have and from which we have connection with each other. And so what I'm going to invite those of you that are on Zoom to do, and if you're watching on Facebook, is put us on gallery view so you're not having to just stare at me, and just take a minute to look at the folks that are in front of you. This is kind of the Brady Bunch moment, right, where we get to look at the boxes. But that's really important, to be able to see each other's faces. The nice thing about Zoom, right, is that you don't know that I'm looking at you and sending you love and grace, but I can do that on Zoom. And that's, for me, been one of the more powerful parts of Zoom, is I can look at people and I can see their faces, and I can send them love and grace while we're having conversation, which if we were face to face would be a little weird if I was just staring at you like that. But it's not that weird on Zoom. So that's one of the things I've found about technology that helps in creating we space, a space of intersubjectivity. And so let's practice that while we're on Zoom. When people are speaking, let's just be really fully present to each other. Practice listening deeply. And I've asked the panel, I will be asking them some questions to reflect, but I hope our conversation is kind of like this emerging tree, kind of a living thing. As we begin talking, we're going to listen to each other. And then we may talk about, we may say, while Palma, who's going to be on the panel, was speaking, this is what came up for me. So what we begin to see is the conversation becomes this living, organic thing that we're all following, or we're all part of. And that's one of the ways we'll practice connecting with each other in good conversation. So I want to introduce our panel. Again, these are people that I deeply appreciate and care for, not only with the work they're doing, but just who they are as people. And so I've had the joy of getting to know them. We have Kathy Berkey, who's with The Big Table, and a lot of you in Louisville know her. She's the co-founder of The Big Table. And Howard Mason, who is the principal at New Possibilities Associates, and has been the guru of the art of hosting in Louisville. So there are so many of us that have sat at the feet of Howard for many years. And then we have Malka Capel. Malka is out in California. She is with Civity, And I'm going to put the Civity website in the chat box, but also put it on Facebook so you can check out the work that she's doing. She is the co-founder and CEO of Civity, and I'll let them share a little bit more about Civity and the purpose of what she's doing, and just incredible work. We connected with Malka, gosh, I guess it was 3 years ago, Malka, something like that.
Yeah.
And I had Malka to Louisville quite a few times to do trainings with corporate groups, trainings with community groups on how to create the kind of spaces that we're going to be talking about. And also I want to welcome to the panel Palma Strand. Palma is the other co-founder of Civity and also does the research with that organization. So I'm going to ask them to introduce themselves. First, I just want a deep bow to all of you as mates and partners in this work of trying to create sacred space. You all are really models of that in your own life, but bringing that to our community seems so important at this time. So again, those of you that are just joining us, welcome. The conversation is around how do we create dynamic we space, and we'll have a panel conversation, but we encourage you to put in comments in the chat box or join us on Zoom and unmute yourself and join the conversation. Thanks for everybody joining us today. Malka, I'm going to have you and Palma start. Introduce yourself. And what I've asked them to say is a little bit about themselves, give us a little context for the work that they do, but also talk about why this work is not only so important in the world, but why is it so important to them? What's the passion or their sense of call or purpose in the world that this work connects to? So Malka, would you mind starting us off? Thanks so much for being here.
My pleasure. Yeah. And let me just say, it's so great to be on a panel that is called How Do We Create Dynamic We Space? That's wonderful. So I'm thrilled at being here, and I'm really looking forward to the conversation. So Civity is a national organization. We started about 7 years ago, and we work toward creating a culture where everybody belongs. Civity is also a word that we use to describe the change that we want to see, which is a culture society where people are in relationship with each other, relationship based on respect and empathy, particularly with people who are different from us. Why is this important now? You know, I think given who's on this call, I don't really need to tell you, but let's just say that you know, the challenges that we face as a country, the pandemic, which has exposed, I think, the inequity in our society, particularly in our economic system, and I think the renewed and broader calls for racial justice really show us that that a culture that has been created based on us versus them doesn't work, and that we need people to see others as part of their we. I think for me personally, I grew up in the Bay Area as a Jewish Indian kid who by definition was different from everybody else. Certainly when I was there, there weren't even Indians in the Bay Area. And I always felt different. And I spent a lot of energy trying to be in other people's conversations, a lot of energy trying to be seen. And I saw early on the value of being seen, how wonderful it was, and learned how to help others see that I see them.
Thank you, Malka. And again, thanks so much for the connection and for your presence and work that you've been doing in Louisville. Palma, would you unmute yourself and share some of the same? Thank you.
I think I'm unmuted, and I also am thrilled to be here and see so many faces of people that I've heard so much about. So I came to this work. So I'm actually a lawyer by training, and lawyers are very head people, and you know, and I'm very interested in big, you know, structural injustice type issues, and then I started to realize I spent some time home with my kids when my kids were younger, and did a lot of community work and started to realize that actually relationships are really what makes institutions work, what makes communities work, what really is kind of fueling the big issues in our communities. And so I started to really focus on relationships and think intentionally and to practice intentionally being in relationship with people, particularly across the kind of social divides that tear our communities apart, racial divides, class divides, etc. And I am particularly invested in this. I'm a white woman of European American descent, and my husband is African American, and my kids are biracial. And as they were growing up, I became acutely aware of the importance of having the conversations about the divides that are in our society, the fractures such as race, and that being in conversation leads to being in relationship, and that's my personal connection.
Thanks, Palma. We are all so blessed that you took the courage to help found Civity. We've all been blessed by that work, so thank you. Kathy, welcome.
Hi, thank you, Judd. Yeah, my name is Kathy Berkey, and nearly 4 years ago, Judd and I started the Big Table. Back at that time, and still is a giant potluck community gathering. It was, we were aiming for the world's largest potluck, and so we have set up for 2,000 people each time. We had about 1,800 people at this last one. And even though it's a giant potluck, we're organized down into tables of 8 so that we have small conversations to learn who you're at the table with. And we have these questions that then drive the conversation to a deep and meaningful level where you can really understand who you're with. And, we got into that because it was early 2017. We could see just how polarized our society was at that time. And we kind of said, okay, what's the path through that? If we have advocacy, people constantly looking for, what their point of view is and trying to pull people from one side to another, how do we get through that together? What's the way through? And the only way through is to have a conversation, and hopefully a conversation that ends up with a little bit of more clarity of how the other person feels. Maybe we are able to kind of park our point of view long enough in order to listen to someone else. And, ultimately to have a space where we can encounter people who are the other. And in that process, we can feel a bit of understanding of the other. And then maybe the next time we encounter that person, or even someone who's similar to that, they don't feel quite so different or quite so, just different. And so we figured what better way to bring people together than over food, and where people who are the other just aren't so far away, but sitting down at a table, eating each other's food that reflects a piece about them. And and the part for me that really brings into that is that we create our worlds by the values that we hold. We make our decisions based, little by little, based on the lived experiences, the values that we form out of the lived experiences in our lives. So we wanted to give everyone a lived experience that may show them that the other, there's a potential to connect across that distance.
Thank you, Kathy. And what a joy it has been to work with you. You are a joy and a bright spot for our community. So thank you.
Well,
and
likewise.
And Howard, welcome to the conversation, and introduce yourself a little bit more.
Thank you. Honored to be here, quite frankly. after doing this work for 40 some years, I finally realized what was the strand that held it together. It was something like, how do we create conditions for everyone to thrive, individuals, kids, families, neighborhoods, communities, institutions, in conditions of rapid change and chaos and disorder and uncertainty. I was brought up on the grounds of mental hospitals my whole life as a kid. My dad was a physician with the VA, and we lived on the grounds of psychiatric hospitals. And we moved every few years, and I went to different school every couple of years. And one of the things that I was proudest of my dad's work was his looking at how we can get these veterans back into the community successfully. And my first career was in journalism. I was a reporter and a picture editor at one of the dailies in Chicago. And I realized that as an afternoon paper, this was not a career that I was going to have for very long. And so I decided to go back into some form of helping work. And I realized that I was more interested in how do we create the conditions so we don't have to do so much treatment. You know, for a while that was called prevention, but even prevention is about illness. So so right now, that's one of the tensions I keep holding in my life. You know, not how do we create something how do we correct something we don't want is less important to me now than how do we create the conditions we do want. You know, so I'm more about health than illness, more about justice than injustice, more about community than disorganization.
Thank you, Howard. So the first question is about questions. The first question is, what questions do you find yourself asking as you're doing this work? Or another way to say it are, what are the wicked questions of this work? And Howard always has been a champion of asking questions. So yeah, and there's no order here. So anybody on the panel, what are questions you find yourself asking right now about this work?
I can volunteer a quick one. Just in this moment, I find myself wondering what we spaces look like during this pandemic. And when we have spaces like this online, I wonder, what is the potential there? What is the potential for having true heartfelt connections? What's the potential for having, well, and I guess I'm really saying what one of my worries is, that how we will work in that space and still find those spaces where we can expand our horizons, because in the quarantine, we're kind of even more so in our own bubbles. So yeah, I find myself wondering, how do we get those perspectives, not just through media, but maybe through spaces like this kind of we space during quarantine.
Great, thank you, Kathy. What are other questions you all are asking?
I just want to tee off of what Kathy is asking, and certainly a question that we have been asking ourselves as well. What do the conditions now say about the opportunity to connect? And it's one thing I've noticed, and you can certainly in the days of in-person meetings, it doesn't necessarily mean that if you are with someone or with others that you are connecting in a way that we're talking about, in an authentic way, where you are meeting the other person or people with respect, where you are trying to walk in their shoes. So I think that focusing on what that connection should look like, and the pandemic gives us that opportunity to ask these questions again. How can we have real connection in this pandemic? Is really the same question we always ask ourselves. How do we have real connection in our society? And I think if we continue to ask ourselves that question, we'll get there, and encourage others to ask themselves, what does it really look like? What does it feel like when I connect with someone, and particularly with someone that I did not know or did not know well, particularly with someone who I did not understand, or who I did not see as part of my community.
Alma or Howard, either of you?
Yeah, I think that the questions that are coming up for me right now really have to do with the moment that we're in, which is the pandemic, and it's also bigger than the pandemic. It's protests and just a huge growing awareness of some of the really deep-seated systemic issues that are troubling our society, like all of our society writ large and our communities that we live in. And I see this outpouring of caring and also resistance. And I mean, it's a very, I think Kathy mentioned chaotic, or somebody mentioned, it's a very, it's a chaotic moment. There's a lot of, and then we've got, climate change. And I mean, there's just a lot going on right now. And I think it's a moment of opportunity, and as well as a moment of, potential danger. And I think the questions really that bubble up for me have to do with how can we create the spaces, create the relationships that are going to provide that sort of relational space, that relational infrastructure to kind of move in a different direction than we've been. So that's really what's kind of coming up for me.
Thank you, Palma. Howard?
A lot of what's going on right now is by necessity expressive, and I'm not sure that in itself will lead us to transformational change. So how do we go beyond the expression of our pain and outrage? How do we and how do we go beyond having the relationships and holding the relationships into creating something that is much different and much better?
Mm-hmm. So the title of this is How Do We Create? So I would like to hear, what are the principles and practices and patterns that you have found meaningful and helpful in creating these kinds of spaces? So I do want us to think and share, for those that are watching, if we want to create these in our organizations or in our families, or in our corporations or in our world, what are some practices that you feel actually do create dynamic we space, and what does that look like? Again, anybody can jump in.
Well, I'll start.
Thanks,
and I want to pick up on a couple of words, Judd, that you used in your introduction. I mean, I think that the being present and listening is, we often think about, we're very, we're free speech, we're a very speech-oriented culture, and we often don't emphasize the listening part. And in any kind of interactive, relational, dialogic space, listening is what creates the container. And I teach conflict resolution classes, and it's just amazing to me how being present and listening, we teach techniques for active listening, and you can do this and you can that, and yet really being present is the most effective way to listen to somebody else. And so I would, that to me, that's like the foundation.
Good, thank you. What else? Principles and practices.
Well, I would add in that you know, there's a lot of talk about having difficult conversations about race, about class, about division, about politics, having difficult conversations. And I think that a lot of the conversations that people are having are head conversations, and they're not engaging all of themselves in the conversation. We think it's important when you're having this conversation to engage as all of yourself, engage your heart as well as your head, not only because that's a good thing, but because that is where the real change happens. And so, you know, I think one technique that we use is, and you've been using it, Judd, as I've seen, not only in the past, but during this very conversation, is a question that enables people to connect their head to their heart. Not only what do you think, but what is your personal story behind that? That is many people try to escape the personal, but they can't if they're asked to share their own story.
Yeah, to piggyback off of that, I would say some of the things that we've learned through the big table, you know, we really tried to go for that story, you know, because everyone's, like I said, everyone's lived experience ends up becoming their values, and it's in understanding each other's experience and values that we come to understand our differences, have some kind of context around it. And so when we can hear someone else's story, like you said, that's the connection through the heart. And Malka, when you said that, I was thinking, you know, not only does the path of the heart lead toward change, the path of the heart is also the limitation to change sometimes. You know, we can't, those fears can't be logicked out. You know, it has to be connected through from the heart in some way in order to shift in any meaningful way. I was also going to add that one thing that the big table has really strove to do is to create sort of a mass mix, to get as many different types of people in one space, in one we space at a time, so that we could see the breadth of diversity, the breadth of thought that exists just in our community. To have an experience where you can talk to someone that is just completely outside of your bubble, you know, completely on a different part of town. And even if you encountered this person, even someone in your own neighborhood, but you would never have a time to just like talk, you know, just to that space, that we space to sit and talk. Yeah, that's one of the things that the practice that I think that we have found has been a good one, and one that we feel is a value add, just creating that spaces for this mass mix of people to come together. Even now when we're trying to do it virtually, trying to get the word out to as many different types of people as we can to bring them all together in one space.
So are you planning a virtual big table?
So we've done, ever since the quarantine happened, we've done many Sunday nights big table events where we've either gone through the questions or we started focusing specifically on courageous conversations on race. So yeah, we've been doing it, and we're kind of in this flux right now of deciding how we want to move forward. What is it that's creating you know, good solid we space? Yeah, it's all part of the journey.
I think I think that we've described it really well. I think that my perspective is that having moved around so much, having been in so many different places, it's a challenge to approach a conversation space and a new person without presuming anything, if possible, with presuming as little as possible. So listening to their story, sensing the culture that story grew out of, understanding how language shapes the expression of their ideas. you know, whatever I thought I know for sure, hang a question mark on it so that I'm not presuming anything that I don't have to presume to hold a conversation.
So actually, I'd like to jump in and say one more thing about this before we move on. Is I think that for somebody who you know joins in conversations like this, I'm actually not a big group person, and I'm the person who, when there's like 10 people, I'm like, oh, I don't really want to say anything, and I think that you know. Weirdly, creating WeSpace can be done really effectively through one-on-one conversations. And you know that I know that I feel most connected and most kind of willing or able to kind of share my story when I'm in a one-on-one interaction conversation. And you know you can create that WeSpace with one-on-one conversations. It doesn't have to be, and I think, you know, Kathy, when you're talking about that big group, I'm thinking, oh my God, but then I'm thinking like that little table of 8, and then maybe like sitting and talking to the person next to me. It's like, oh, okay, I can do that. And so I think that it's really important to keep remembering that those relationships really happen person to person in that larger we.
Want to read a quote to see what comes up for you, and this is Paulo Freire, or Freire, who is a Latin American he wrote the book Pedagogy of the Oppressed, and talked a lot about how do we let those who are marginalized or oppressed create their own pedagogy of freedom, create their own path of freedom. He says that he understands dialogues as conversations fostered in a spirit of inquiry that allow the participants to not only comprehend and delineate their world, but also to transform it. Such comprehension can come only if people find a cultural voice to tell their own story through a process of dialogue. Do y'all have any thoughts or responses to that? And
yes.
Yeah, please go ahead.
Well, my
Yes,
response
that's
is,
the response. Is yes.
My response is yes, particularly that that having the conversation transforms society. That is, and I mean, and that's why we do our work. I'm sure that's why you do yours. It's that it's these simple but powerful connections between people are what creates society. They can create a society that marginalizes, they can create bad institutions and structures, and they can undo those negative and harmful institutions and structures. It comes down to how we see others, how we see our community.
I think what's resonating for me is John Paul Lederach and Moral Imagination, Art of Peacemaking. He talks about a couple of concepts. He talks about the 200-year present, the period of time from the birth of the oldest person we might know to the death of the youngest person we might know, is essentially a 200-year span, and that's the moment we live in. And so in to expect marginalized and oppressed people to see the way forward, we have to also validate what's been in the past. And so marginalized and oppressed people, according to Lederach, back into the future. They're looking backwards as they move into the future. And there's this cynicism that they carry with them, because there's been efforts before that have not gotten, they've been promised things before that haven't been delivered on. And it tends to be more and more of the same. And so the people in marginalized groups move forward by looking backwards with significant cynicism. So then the question becomes, how, you know, in fear, in the pedagogy that you were talking about, how do we open the space for that new future to emerge? I mean, they need to be the authors of that new future, but it needs to be in the broader context of relationship, perhaps even with their oppressors.
Mhm. There was some research that was done that shows that white people or advantaged populations want intergroup contact and dialogue that leads to harmony, while Black people or disadvantaged populations want dialogue that surfaces issues of power and allows them to express difficult emotions. So I think we're finding that different populations are coming to these dialogue spaces with some different psychological needs. And so how do we create spaces that honor those? Because we know that sometimes those spaces may not be safe spaces where we experience harmony. You know, they may be challenging spaces, but how do we honor the different needs for dialogical space based upon those needs, which I think we're bumping into as a challenge. Any thoughts or reflections on that from you all?
Yeah, so when I think of Freire's work, I really think it's about power, right? I mean, it's about people who have had less power, being, developing their own story and then carrying that story to other people. And I think, one of the things that we see, and I think this kind of gets a little bit to what Howard did and what you were talking about, is that, people who have been in power, been in the dominant group, it's like, well, we've got things sorted out, we've got things arranged. I think of it sometimes as like, we've got our club, we've got the rules, we're all good. And then it's like, well, we'll let some new members in. And I think that what the pedagogy of the oppressed says is, no, it's not about letting people into a club and sort of having things continue to be the way they are. It's like, well, what is the game we're going to play? It's like, let's change the game. And as you say, that's not peaceful necessarily. It's not harmonious. It's like, let's, throw the pickup sticks up in the air and rearrange them. And that is a tension, that if you're going to be engaged in these conversations that are about power, then they're going to be, any kind of a growth conversation there is going to be potentially unsettling, unsafe, uncomfortable for at least some of the people involved.
Right on. Thank you. I mean, when I was trying to pull my thoughts together for this, there was that question about safe space. And for the life of me, I don't know what safe or unsafe means. What's the worst that's going to happen? Somebody's going to shoot me for saying something? I don't think so. So the idea of safety is physical. It's not physical safety. Is it emotional safety? Yeah, maybe that's what it's about. So in my work, I really want to invite the adventurers in, the folks who enjoy a risk. And so I was thinking that it's kind of like a three-point continuum. On the one hand, in the middle is what Pama just described, that business as usual. We may get incremental change, little bits at a time, but essentially it's business as usual. At the end that I was just making a reference to are the adventurers. Safe, return, doubtful. We want a challenge. We take risks in our life, and we're willing to experience not only discomfort, but everything that we thought we knew for sure is now on shaky grounds. And the power base that I use as the organizing feature for my life is now open for negotiation. And at the other end are the spaces that I call spa spaces. Spa spaces, people come to have a nice relaxing experience. They want a little massaging of their entitlement and privilege, and maybe a little exfoliation, but nothing too abrasive. And for people in pain, even privileged people in pain, that might be the right experience.
Mm-hmm.
But that's not transformational in my mind, and that, so it's that adventurer mindset that I'm hoping to invite people into.
What else is coming up?
Sometimes that's, yeah, as here, and I think that we think a lot about vulnerability and risk, and when we do our work and invite people to enter these kinds of we conversations, and we want people to understand that their vulnerability is not only something that could happen, a feeling that they might have, but it is necessary for them to have an experience that could be transformative. If I'm not risking anything, I'm not getting much. And so sometimes the one-on-one conversations are easier for people to go in with a little feeling vulnerable. They can practice that vulnerability, and they're just with one other person. But I do think that even so, if in case they're not an adventurer, but perhaps that's a way to support people along the path, which will be difficult.
Mm-hmm.
What else is coming up? And again, welcome those of you that are joining us on Facebook Live. Thanks for your comments here. And anybody on Zoom want to ask a question, feel free to unmute yourself and jump in. There's a comment from Julie. I like, let's change the game. It's not about letting people into the existing club. So echoing that comment. One of the things, go ahead, Kathy.
We were talking earlier about the shift of WeSpace into this online space. And in this format, one thing that I've been pleased to find out is to see the way that it has changed the balance of power within a conversation. That I've learned a couple of tricks through some really bright facilitators about how to do that intentionally too. So like asking the group to think about their answer to a question and then writing it in the chat box in Zoom, but all hitting enter at the same time so that all of the answers come in at the same time. So there is this influence of who answers first or who answers last, or, it brings a lot of equity into that interaction. And I've heard other people, use these online interactive or online collaboration tools where you can like put sticky notes, virtual sticky notes all up on the same screen together. And that those ideas then are generated just equitably out into that workspace. So that could be coming from the senior vice president, or it could be coming from a coordinator. It's our work, it's our ideas, it's our, it's just this really nice leveling of things. That gives me a lot of hope for this new chapter that we're in, to see what we can learn and what kind of new norms we might pick up by being in that type of we space, whether the we space is an organization or it's, a civic we space like we've been talking about. But that's been one of the, yeah, those little like silver linings. That's fun.
I want to, what does it feel like to move into really juicy we space? Like what's happening in these encounters with one another? Let's unpack that a little bit. And then are there ingredients that you think go into creating the possibility for that to happen? And if so, what are those ingredients of juicy we space?
So I'm thinking, as you asked that question, Judd, I'm thinking about a comment that when Malka and I were kind of working through sort of how to bring this kind of experience to people, we were working with a young woman out in San Francisco who, actually a group of young tech folks out in San Francisco who were game to be guinea pigs in a sense. And one of them, when, Malka worked with her, I'm thinking of I'm thinking of Malka and
Laura,
Laura, and she went in and did a one-on-one conversation, as we had asked her to, with somebody she didn't really know very well. And when she came back and talked to us, she said it's really, this is a conversation that was authentic and real, but not like we call it not the BFF. She said it was kind of like having been to a rock concert together. It was like an experience of sharing something that was genuine and real and deep in an hour. And I think that there's an experiential element to this, that we can experience it, but it's kind of hard to describe, actually.
Mm-hmm. What I heard in that, Palma, was the mix between some intentionality and maybe having a few tools in the back of my mind to know that I can have the confidence to even try to move into that space, while also holding those tools lightly, just to kind of be present, but also know that I've got maybe some questions or ways of being. And I think that's a lot of what Civility is teaching, these kind of really simple tools that can allow conversations to flourish like that, and give us a little bit of courage for that.
I think that, we are programmed to connect with other people. It's like we're human, we're programmed to connect, and yet we so often connect sort of so superficially, but we can really connect with people just even in passing. And when you do really authentically connect with another person, it's powerful, just experientially powerful. And yes, absolutely, you can be intentional. And you also have to be in that moment, that presence of being there with that other person. And that does take, it is a kind of practice in a way.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't happen naturally. I think it happens, maybe naturally with those who are nearest and dearest, but that's not who we're talking about. So I think the intention is essential, because it's not a no-brainer. It may be simple. We may have the natural talents to connect, but it needs to be, there needs to be intention behind it, particularly this connection that we're talking about with someone that we don't know well, or who might represent a group of people who we feel is the other.
In opening we spaces for small groups or moderate-sized groups even, it takes an invitation so that people know what they're being invited into, and they can come prepared or gracefully decline if that's not what they want to participate in. It takes an opening to shift the space from conversational space into the we space. For me, it takes a really juicy question so that there's something there that I already have been chewing on before I arrive. And then I tried to, this morning, imagine myself stepping into that space. What would I feel? How do I feel? And I feel a sense of possibility. I feel like I'm stepping into the unknown, and I like the ambiguity and paradox and the unfreezing of what we take for granted. I may feel confused. I may feel anxious. I'm always excited. I am confident that I'll be okay no matter what happens. So my sense of safety comes from me. It's that confidence of I'm going to be okay. I'm committed to bringing myself authentically and to sharing what gifts I have to offer. And I feel free to not participate or leave if I'm not contributing or learning.
That's a great summary, Howard. That's
One of
those
the
are all elements.
one of the tools that I've found is the power of silence. At moments, just to bring in a moment of silence, and the ability to behold another in the midst of silence that's beyond words. So I'm going to invite us just to 20, 30 seconds of silence. And you can do what you want on that. But let's be silent for a minute. Thank you. So what happened in that silence? What do you think, what's happening in silence that leads to a deeper experience?
One thing that started to happen for me, I'm so glad you did that, Judd, is I felt after a few seconds, I felt a little off balance. I felt not quite myself. And I think, you know, I was going to say this earlier, kind of what does it feel like to be in juicy we space? I'm shy, and I always feel, even if I know it'll be a great experience, I always feel a little nervous, a little shy, a little scared, a little not like me when I go into this situation. And that's, the silence kind of started to prepare me to feel that way. I've gotten to the point where when I experience that feeling of being a little off balance, I'm not as afraid of it as I used to be. I'm starting to welcome it, and I was welcoming it in that recent moment of silence. But I think for me, it is a necessary part of the experience.
Thank you. What else is happening?
So I was thinking of my father, actually. My father was a Swedish American from Iowa. And I remember being in the room one time when he and his very, very longtime friend, Howard Nelson, were having a conversation. And my father would say something, and then there would be silence. And then Howard would say something, and then there would be silence. And my father would say, you get the idea. And, you know, I think that what was happening to me in the silence was I was really kind of hearing the echoes of what other people were saying without feeling like I needed to say anything.
What was that, Al? What did you put up? What was the sign?
Is that where you're from, Al?
Manchester.
Manchester? I don't know where that is.
How you got to unmute yourself, Al.
Field of Dreams.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
That was my grandfather's farm.
Ah, really? Gowrie,
Wow.
Webster County.
You know, as you were speaking, it reminded me of what Quaker meetings are a lot like, where you don't really say something until you feel like the space between you wants that to happen, so that the intersubjective space, the collective space, then wants to speak, and we happen to be the one that give it voice. And I think that would be a wonderful kind of principle. Can I read the field that we've created, and what does it want to say? It just may happen to want to say it through me, but it's coming through me, but it's not from me. And what is it like to know a space like that?
Yeah, that's what happened to me in that space, is that I could all of a sudden feel the we, I could feel this in a way that's different when I'm, like I think you guys said, that I'm not focused on the conversation, where it's going, and who's going to talk next, and it's just the what is it that's here, what is it that's growing, what is it that's emerging, and it's that feeling that then writing with that feeling, like you said, Judd, that's the wisdom of what wants to come through. Yeah. That's the beautiful thing that makes me feel centered, that makes me feel, like you said, Malka, like, then I'm not as shy. then I feel like I'm grounded and centered. Yeah.
All of our panelists, are all of you all introverts? All of you all maybe, no, Kathy's not, yeah. The rest of
I'm
you.
not.
Yeah.
I hate presenting. I hate training people. But yet here I am in this kind of
So that's not an introvert extrovert thing.
It must, yeah, I was wondering what we do know that introverts like silence after a question, because extroverts they process what they're going to say as they're saying it, but introverts need time to know where they are. And so in dialogical space, it's important to give silence so that introverts are able to express themselves. So that's a tool. Take note. What else is emerging? How about some stories of where we've experienced these moments, whether with another individual or in a group? How about what comes up for you when you think about a juicy we space, and what's going on there? What does it feel like? What are examples of them?
I have something that comes to mind right off the bat, because as we've been talking about, what makes a juicy we space, of thinking about some of our courageous conversations on race that we've done over Zoom, over the last 6 weeks or so. And I think one of our first ones, it was the most diverse, I think, that we had. And Judd, you found some great ways of centering Black voices in that call, really trying to highlight Black perspectives right now, giving voice. And I remember at the very end, there was someone that said, we want to heal from this, but we're just not there yet. And it was just so raw, and it was just so honest and true. That was one of those like super juicy moments of just someone just speaking their truth out to it. And I guess feeling safe enough to express that too.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Thanks, Kathy. How about others?
I recently had an experience in the Bay Area. We were supporting a human library where people identify as books. human books, and they may represent in the book title one type of occupation, like a police officer, or one type of experience, like someone who has lived in poverty. And community members check them out for 20-minute conversations. So we recently held one just before the pandemic hit, so it was in person, and interviewed a family of 4 that came to the Human Library, and they checked out 3 books. They had 3 conversations. And so the parents brought their daughters, who looked to be about, I would say, 5 and 7, so young. And he asked them, why did you come, and what did you get out of it? And they were, beautifully eloquent. Both the parents talked about how meaningful it was to have a conversation that was authentic. The woman said she didn't like small talk, and being able to, in 20 minutes, because they knew the space was there, right? It was prepared for them to be able to get into meaningful dialogue quickly, and to ask questions that you couldn't ask of someone you just met on the street. And when asked why they brought their kids, they said that they wanted them to understand that, about our diverse and unique society in a way that we never had a chance to do growing up. And they hoped that their daughters would grow up with less stigma than they did.
What else? If there are questions, questions from panel members or questions from those joining us on Facebook Live, feel free to type those in, or comments. We'll bring those into the conversation. Terry, you want to, I think you got a great question. You want to unmute yourself and kind of ask that question? I think that's a good question.
So I'm hearing, and I'm sorry, I did have to step away for a moment for a work issue, but I was curious if anyone has shared yet, or if they would, any place where you've been a part of conversations that may have been difficult conversations for smaller, larger groups, and what kind of container you set up for that, and what lessons that you've learned. And maybe it was that no one showed up, and so even that was the lesson, but the harder conversations too. And one of the points I don't know if this is not necessarily a part of the question, but something that you just said and someone else said, Jed, that made me think. I'm wondering too, I think it was Kathy who said that about when you were having the conversation, they said, we're not ready to forgive yet. We're not ready to move on. And having worked with folks who've experienced trauma and things like that, that there's like these stages of grief, and realizing that people are in different stages. So even if you're hosting a conversation, that's an important conversation that might help people move forward. If they're showing up, and depending on what stage they're in, just again, kind of thinking of the stages of grief, how well they're able to participate in that conversation, and maybe having conversations that nurture the offended group, for lack of a better word of putting it, too, if that's been a part of anyone's tactic before bringing together the groups that might be, where there might be a little conflict or difficulty. I hope that made sense. That was a lot, sorry.
Sure.
The first thing that comes to mind for me is, so we piloted the Courageous Conversations on Race last October, and we intentionally had, well, it just kind of worked out, I guess, that there was about half of the group were people of color, and then half were white. And we kept our questions grounded in personal experience. That's one of those containers, that kind of keep the keeps it from crosstalk and keeps it from being disputed. You know, it's your own experience, so it's true. And yeah, the container also was that we would ask a question and each person had a chance to answer. We had 3 rounds with the same question in that way. So that way each person has the platform for the same amount of time as someone else. And again, you're speaking from your experience. But yeah, that was a way of making a container that is tight enough to hold kind of a messy topic.
I would also say I facilitate conversations about race and belonging. And a lot of what I've found over the years is that personal stories are a way to be present, to create a space for people to be present to each other. And people, you know, a lot of the way like race and other kinds of oppression work in our society is that people, you know, it's kind of, I think of it as the Martin Buber sort of it, you know, it's like I'm me and then that other person is. And if you are really in an I-thou kind of interaction, that, and really being present, that is and with a story, a person can always choose what kind of a story to tell, you know, because we have so many stories that it create it's the nucleus of that kind of present to each other space that is that kind of addresses, I think, the issue that you're talking about of not objectifying people, of being present to them, to each other as people. I think it's similar to what Kathy is describing. Actually, it's a very much of a heart connection rather than being up in your head.
So what I'm hearing, I think, is maybe that what you're doing or what the best practice might be is to have more of a space where we're just showing up and sharing versus asking questions that cause people to engage and exchange certain information that you want them to talk about, but they're showing up with whatever they're ready or wanting to share themselves. It sounds like it's a little different, I think.
You know what it's a very, in Civity, we sometimes say that a Civity conversation, that relational conversation, is the conversation before the conversation. It's like before you can have that conversation about the issue or the whatever's really on your mind, you have to really be in some kind of relationship with that other person. And that doesn't have to be deep or intimate, but there has to be a person-to-person connection. And that creates that connection that creates the foundation for everything else.
Yeah, I wish I could cite the research that I just learned about this, but the point that they made was that the relationship has to be there first in order for true dialogue to happen. True dialogue in the exchanging of ideas and any kind of, you know, any kind of meeting of ideologies. That relationship has to be there for it to go anywhere at all. Yeah.
I wanted to
go ahead, Malka, please.
I wanted to say a few words about conversations that where there isn't the container, where we have not created this container in advance, because we have, as you know, as humans moving around our world, we have opportunities for those conversations, you know, many times a day. Paula and I talk about this. We refer to it as a Civity brush, which is the short interaction with a person at a slightly different level than we would normally have, where, you know, at the very least, you can show respect. You know, for example, I've been going to the same grocery store for a long time. I usually go to my grocery store at the end of my walk. I'll do my walk around the neighborhood and then I'll stop at the grocery store and buy my groceries. And after Paul and I started talking about the brushes, I decided to put that into practice. And this time when I got my groceries, I asked the guy who was bagging them for me, how's it going? instead of my automatic thank you, look down and leave, I looked up and said, how's it going? And he told me how it's going. And after that, every time I saw him, I'd ask him how it's going, and he'd ask me how it was going. That was short, but it felt different. It felt different. A few months ago, I was on my walk, bought my groceries, and realized I had forgotten my wallet. And so Michael, the guy said, I said, oh my God, I need to, I'll go home, and leave these groceries, I'll go home and come back. He goes, it's all right, I know you. Mm. And he didn't, it was through these, I tell you, 15-second conversations.
Mm. That's beautiful.
I have to agree. I host regular conversations that are difficult, but they're not really conversation. I host town halls, and we go through just a process of listening, to an article, or reading an article and rereading it and going through it again, and out of that state, we create this container of safety, not safety, but trust, and honor everyone's, place to be there. And after we get done, I get more invitations to have conversations from that, and more invitations to say, how can we do this within our smaller team, right? And within those smaller teams, you have this gamut that runs from the very enthusiastic to the real laggard, right? And you can almost feel that the growth is going to happen when you see the laggard start to nod their head,
Mm-hmm. I want to go back to the silence for a moment. One of the things that was happening for me in the silence is I was trying to practice beholding you, which I love the word, behold. And a couple of things began to happen. I began to wonder some things, and I want to, this is a tool that I found really helpful on Zoom calls, so I'll echo it. There's a beauty of seeing where you are. Like, I'm seeing into your homes. And Palma, I wondered, what's that image of that boy kind of sideways? And then I noticed you had, I actually clicked on your picture and made it bigger, and I saw that you have some of your ancestors maybe there in the black and white. And then, yeah, and so all of a sudden you became, and it was really beautiful this morning, Rhodey and Al and I were doing a Lectio Divina around a poem by Rilke, and it was essentially, how do we hold each other in great mystery, a mysterious love? Can I hold myself in mysterious love? And then can I hold other people in a posture of mysterious love? And so I had these wonderings about you, Palma. I'm like, I wonder who those people are. I wonder what that kid is. And so what I found that a lot of times I'll just ask. So Palma, I'm going to ask, if you don't mind, would you share what those are?
I'm happy to share. I do that just to, pique people's curiosity. So I am in the room in my house that my middle child, my daughter, Elaine, this is her bedroom growing up. That's her color. That blue is her color. And when she was like, I don't know, I'm thinking like 4th or 5th grade, she did this thing at school where they lay down on a piece of paper and did an outline, and then she got to paint it in. She's very artistic. And so that's Elaine when she was, I can actually remember the skirt that she was wearing that day. And although she's not blonde, so I'm not sure, whether there was only yellow paint or whether she was just inspired that day. So when I moved into the office and set up my my Zoom here and everything, and people are looking up at, and I thought, but I'm not going to move it because I love it. So, but those are my my grandparents, both sets of grandparents over there, looking, and then below that is my high school graduation picture. I went to a high school where my graduating class had 852 people in it. And that's my graduation picture.
Beautiful. Yeah, thank you. And so you see that that's a tool right there, right? It's a simple tool that doesn't have to take a lot of time, and you don't even have to do it with everybody. And I want to make this point, and Civity does this really well. I've watched you do this. In a larger group, a lot of times we will transfer an interaction that we had with the person next to us of intimacy and connection then to the whole room. And I think that's a really important tool to be able to have at the beginning, an important encounter here with one other person, that then the transfer, it will transfer it to a group. All of a sudden, we don't have any rational reason to do that. But often you'll find that, if I can have had an encounter here, all of a sudden this space becomes different, and I can trust it more, and I can be more open in it. And I've watched Civity do that really well. So that's another tool, just tool as you're thinking about safe space.
I sometimes say, so I teach students at the college and graduate level, and when I'm asking them to do something that's a little out of their comfort zone, I will often say, so I'm going to do it first, because I'm not going to ask you to do anything that I wouldn't do myself in this space. So I'm modeling for them that I'm willing to take that risk. And as you point out, one of the things we know from Civity is that if I take a risk, it's very likely that invites that reciprocal risk from somebody else. But that means that I have to take the risk.
Mm-hmm.
And we used that principle that came out through some research with our conversation cards. So we have 3 decks of cards, and they're in different levels of intimacy.
I heard about this.
And
Yeah.
one of the things we learned, this was a study that showed that when people show that they'll take an intimacy card from the 3rd pile, the most intimate, other people watch that, and it creates a norm of openness quicker, because they say like, somebody's willing to risk going level 3. I'm going to go level 3, or they will either choose that level or they'll go a level deeper. It's kind of like this game of intimacy. But what we found is that when they have the choice and they see it modeled before them, they're more likely to go into a more intimate question. So, good point.
Very cool.
And just piggybacking off of what you said earlier, Jed, what we saw at the big table was that the intimacy that was created at the small tables, afterwards, it just transferred into the people at large. So then all of a sudden, this level of intimacy that was just 8, you get up and people are walking around and tasting the food from other tables, and there's just this intimacy of a group of 2,000 all of a sudden. And then everyone leaves there with this feeling of like, there is hope in the world.
Once you open someone's heart, it stays open for a little while, and they love the experience of it.
So I'm going to practice another conversation tool that we have found helpful on Zoom and just in groups in general. Let's do a debrief. And a debrief is a moment to kind of, I'll give us a couple of minutes of silence, and for you to check in again with kind of where you are. Those that have been joining us on Facebook, and got a really great group of folks on Facebook. You do this as well. What's been meaningful? When have I opened up in this conversation? When have I been inspired? How am I feeling right now? What did I learn? Those are all kind of good debriefing questions, and I probably shouldn't throw out 6 of them, but I'm going to let you choose. But just take a moment and think about what we've been talking about, and let's each, all of you that are on Zoom, I'm going to ask to check out. So you've got, 30, 45 seconds just to kind of harvest what's happened. And for the sake of time, I'm going to go Terry, Al, Rhodey, and then we'll go back through the way that we introduced ourselves. Howard, Kathy, Palma, Malka. So let's go in that order of checkout, if that's okay. Terry, yeah, that's you. Thanks.
Yeah, the two things that stuck with me, one was the potency, the benefit of sharing stories, listening to them as well. And the second was the importance of cultivating relationships. As, yeah, just those two things, stories and cultivating relationships. Thank you.
Thanks, Terry. Al?
I think it has everything to do with just staying connected and being part of a journey with people that have a passion for wanting to have conversations. And I can still recall, meeting Malka and being very encouraged. And I can also remember the very first big table. And between now and then and now, and then figuring out where the next step will be. That's the fun, just staying connected and sharing and being in the moment, but also, being courageous, being transparent.
Thanks, Al. Rhodey?
I wrote down, Kathy, someone said it's a no-brainer, but it is a no-brainer that it's hard work. And so it was all about creating those safe spaces. I was thinking about what's so exciting about, why do we get so engaged? What's so exciting about it is a kind of kinesthetic. I mean, of course, I'm the guy that, verbally processes, but so it's that we know who we are and how we're going when we start doing the work. And that's why it's so heady and exciting.
Thanks, Rhodey. Howard, and then Kathy.
When I do this work with groups over an extended period, I fall in love with the people. And I love you guys.
Thanks, Howard. We love you back. Kathy?
One of the most powerful moments for me was the moment when Palma pointed out that we space can exist between two people. And I just love that. I'm really chewing on that thought, and recognize, bringing that in to part of it. Like, yes, that we is absolutely there. That is the relationship between you and me. And every conversation, every thought, and every interaction, that's as much part of what we're talking about than it is when it's the large scale or even the neighborhood conversation or the family conversation, like any scaling up or down of that. It's still just about what happens between you and me, that space in between. Thank you for that.
Thank you. Palma, thanks again so much for your presence today on the panel.
No, it's been wonderful. And I just want to pick up on Howard's comment about falling in love. I think that, I was thinking about, I fell into this space with, I know Malka, but I don't really know the rest of you. And I fell into this space and there's, there's this word flow that this guy with the very long Polish name that starts with a C, when you're in that space where there's flow and a really wonderful conversation, I think gets you into that flow space. And Judd, I want to thank you and everybody else for creating a space where a stranger can just be in the flow.
Beautiful, thank you. Malka?
Well, I think because I am a nerd and shy, that I started this conversation in my head and prepared in my head for it. Oh, we're going to be talking about WeSpace. What do I know? And thanks to you, Judd, and to the others on this call that I can see, and you made me see, even though I know some of you, this space helped move my, help move myself to my heart. So I feel really happy. Thank you.
Thank you. And that's the byproduct of beautiful WeSpace, right? Juicy WeSpace, as we leave feeling more whole, more connected to ourselves, to others. And that's the hope. I'm so, when this, the pandemic hit, and I realized we weren't probably going to be able to do a face-to-face big table. I mean, I literally had tears over that. I was just like, oh my gosh, we've been doing so much good work in creating these communities of practice where we're gathering and connecting with each other. And I was really depressed. I thought, there's no way I'm going to get all of my intimacy needs met. I have high intimacy needs. There's no way I'm going to be able to get those met. But I really am encouraged that all of these calls that I do every day, and with groups of people, I am actually, I am being filled, and I am getting my need for community, for connection, for intimacy. I mean, it's not the same. It's not embodied in the same way. But I am connecting to a space that's not just me. Like, I feel you all, and you're in California and all over the country. And when we have people call in, like, my heart literally feels like it's going out to all of these places around the globe, around the country, around the city. And I'm feeling connected. And so I want to say we can do this, even with the challenges that we have before us with technology. We can do that. And it does take courage. It takes showing up. And it takes creating new venues and platforms to be community, so that everybody belongs. To my panel, deep joy when I look at your faces, and not only just the panel, but all of you that are on here right now. You bring me courage and encourage me. You enhearten me. So thank you all for being present. Those of you that have joined us on Zoom, thanks so much. I hope you all have felt the presence wherever you are, that our hearts are reaching out to you and connecting with you all as well. Again, this recording, this will be recorded and put up on Zoom. If you want to share it, feel free to do that. Also, IPP's doing a Keep IPP Alive campaign for $18 a month. We're encouraging people to give a donation to Interfaith Paths to Peace that allows us to keep this work online, and I'll post a link to that on Facebook, so you're welcome to do that. A big shout out to Malka, to Palma, to Howard, and to Kathy. Thank you so much for your wisdom and presence today. And you can unmute ourselves and we can all say goodbye to each other. Thank you all.
Thank you all so much.
This is wonderful.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thanks,
Thank
Brody.
you.
Take
Good to
care.
have you here. Thanks, Malka. Thanks, Palma.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.